Hi everyone, it's Miss Ortlieb. Um, I want to go over this human fertilization and development PowerPoint with you now that we discuss the male and female reproductive system. We talked about the menstrual cycle, and we talked about meiosis, the making of sperm and egg. So we're on to the next step now. And I'm actually going to just go back to meiosis just to review quickly. Um, so the last assignment, I had you um, do a meiosis PowerPoint and look at a few animations. And the one thing, it can be a little complicated, but just the basics, what I need you to know about meiosis is that meiosis is a type of cell division that produces sperm and egg, okay? And what it does to the chromosome number is it cuts it in half. So here you see that there are single chromosomes when you start with two double chromosomes up here. If you're talking about human sperm and egg, we have 46 chromosomes in all our body cells. And so you would end up with 23 chromosomes in a sperm or an egg cell. And that's really important for the next step. One other thing that hopefully you noticed in the animation from the Life's Greatest Miracle movie is that every sperm and egg that's created through meiosis is completely unique. And that's because of processes like crossing over, where the chromosomes actually switch pieces. I hope you saw that in the movie. And the way they line up is very random. So, which chromosomes end up in which cells is random. So that increases variation. Okay, and that's going to be important when we talk about evolution. So now we're on to the next step. So we got sperm and egg. So what happens if the egg is fertilized? Okay, now this process is called fertilization. It is the joining of the sperm and egg. It takes place in the oviduct or the fallopian tube. And that sperm and egg, once they join their nuclei, it has the full amount of DNA that's needed to produce a human. And so that would be called a zygote. Okay, so fertilized egg is called a zygote, and that has a human zygote would have 46 chromosomes. Okay, and you can kind of see that in the picture here. There's the two nuclei are fusing or joining together. Okay, and this is a picture of what we just talked about. So here's the sperm and egg coming together, and these are the two nuclei of the sperm and egg joining to form that zygote that has 46 chromosomes. So it has a complete set of DNA. Okay, and that will continue even as it grows. That chromosome number is maintained. All right. The next slide talks about how you grew from one cell. So you were about one cell for about 24 hours. And how did you become this multicellular organism with trillions of cells? That is because of another type of cell division known as mitosis. Now, we didn't get a chance to really learn mitosis while we were in school, but one thing I do want you to know about mitosis, just to make it easy, is that it makes identical cells. Okay, so that one cell up here in the picture that has 46 chromosomes, it actually divides, makes a copy of the DNA and all the chromosomes, and so you end up with an identical cell. Okay, and this is how that zygote grows, and it goes from 2 cells to 4 cells. Each of these cells divide, and you get 8 cells and so on and so forth. And so you can't really call it a zygote once it starts to divide. You would now refer to that as an embryo. Okay, and this is a very early stage of development. So really important to understand is that each one of the cells in this embryo has the same amount of DNA, 46 chromosomes, and is completely identical at this point. Okay, so this is how an embryo grows. Now, the next slide, it actually shows you, I believe these are frog. This is a frog zygote growing by mitosis and becoming an embryo. This is a cool thing. I'm sure on YouTube you can Google this and you can look it up and you can actually see the cell divisions taking place. They did show you that in the movie too. Okay, and so this would be called an embryo. That first cell up here would be the zygote, but each one of these cells has the same amount of DNA. Okay, Now, this ball of cells, it has a very specific name. It's called a morula. You don't have to know these terms, but this is, again, is just showing you how you grow by mitosis. And what eventually happens is this ball of cells forms like a hollow ball, okay? And that hollow ball is called a blastula. They talked about this during the movie. This is where, if scientists are studying stem cells, which are like blank cells that can become any cell, they would be taken from the embryo at this point. Okay, and they did show a nice clip of this at the movie, during the movie. Now, the next step, now this as this is happening, as the cell's dividing, it's actually moving towards the uterus. Okay, so remember we talked about fertilization taking place here. I like this picture because it actually shows you a lot of the processes we talked about. So here is ovulation. So about the 14th day of a woman's cycle, halfway through the cycle, she releases one egg. That egg will travel into the oviduct or the fallopian tube. And if there's a sperm there, this is where the sperm fertilizes the egg. Okay, and in the movie, it showed you the daunting journey that the sperm take to meet the egg, and one will fertilize that egg. Now, as that egg continues to move, it's dividing. So this is the zygote that divides by mitosis. And one important thing that has to happen is it has to implant into the wall of the uterus. So here, that uterine lining is all built up thanks to the progesterone hormone, and it finds a nice cushy spot and it embeds itself, which means it sinks deep into the uterine wall, and that's where it develops for the remainder um, of the time. Okay, so this is an important step called implantation. This is where the embryo implants into the wall of the uterus, and this is the site of fetal development, right in here. Okay, and the embryo continues to grow. It goes through these special folding patterns, like they showed you in the movie. It's called gastrulation. It starts to look pretty different here. So it folds into forming different layers, and each of those layers will become a specific part of the fetus. Okay. Now, this is a funny picture. I know it looks like a clown face, but it's just showing you the different layers that it forms. So the layer that's all the way on the inside is known as the endoderm. The layer all the way on the outside is called the ectoderm. And then some of the inner layers over here are called the mesoderm. Now, each of these cells, before this, they were pretty much identical, but now as they start to move to different places, okay, and they start getting different messages from hormones and other chemical signals, they will now start to become different cells. And this is a process called differentiation. And differentiation, although is a long word, it's a pretty easy word to understand because the word different is in the term. And this is when the cells start to become specialized or different. So they're no longer all the same cells, depending on their location and what signals they're getting, what hormonal signals. They're going to become skin cells or bone cells or muscle cells. So that's very specific. Okay, and in the movie they touched on that. So the next slide shows you what the different layers actually become. So the ectoderm, or the outer layer, will form your skin, obviously, because that's on the outside. Some of your nervous system, hair, nails. Your mesoderm forms your muscles, circulatory system, testes, and ovaries. And the endoderm forms some of the innermost organs, lining of the digestive and respiratory tracts, liver, and pancreas. Now, I don't know if that actually works. You can try to click on that to see the frog embryos. If not, you can look at it in YouTube. And then what will happen is the embryo continues to grow. So this is an embryo at 4 weeks. Okay. Um, a lot of people think this is the head. It's actually the heart. The head is up here. Okay. Um, Embryo at 5 weeks. So you can start to see the beginnings of an eye over here. So you can see this right here. That's the eye. This is the heart over here forming. Okay. And see if I can get back to that. Embryo at 6 weeks. And this is a cool picture because it shows you the what's known as the heart's here, eyes here. You can see the hands and the legs, the arm, the limbs. They're actually called the arm buds. Okay, you can see the beginnings of the backbone here. Okay, and then you start to see some other specialized structures. You start to see this is called the egg sac, and this protective sac right here. Okay, that's filled with a fluid. So when you hear about a woman's water breaking, this is the fluid that actually is escaping from the um, the sac. Okay, so just to continue, this is called the amniotic fluid in here, and this sac is known as the amniotic sac. Okay. Now, after 8 weeks, it's no longer called an embryo because it actually has the organs, all the organs. Some of them are not all fully functional, but it does have all the organs that an adult human being would have. And so this is now called a fetus at 8 weeks. Okay, and another structure that's important that they introduced in the video, you'll see, is the placenta. Okay, now we're going to get to that in a minute. Here's the fetus at 12 weeks. This is a good picture because it actually shows you the umbilical cord. So this is filled with baby's blood vessels. Looks like that long string coming from the belly button, filled with baby's blood vessels. And the placenta is actually made up of fetal and maternal tissue. So this side here that you're seeing is the fetal tissue. So these are all the blood vessels that come out and form that side of the placenta. The opposite side would be the uterine tissue from the mother. Okay, so this is another picture here of the placenta. Right up here, here's the fetus, the umbilical cord, the vagina and cervix, and you can see how the placenta is coming off of the uterine wall. So it is made in the uterus. Okay. Now this is just another picture of the placenta. So this is the fetal side, like I mentioned, the blood vessels extending from the umbilical cord, and the maternal side would be the tissue from the uterine wall. Okay. Now this is a really important organ because the baby's contained in that amniotic sac. So the only way it can get its nutrients would be through the mother's blood. Now, the blood of the baby and the mother never mix, so it has to happen through diffusion. So materials are exchanged like nutrients, anything small enough to diffuse, which we know are nutrients like glucose, um, anything small, fatty acids and glycerol, amino acids, oxygen is small enough, and it also is a site of exchange for the removal of waste like carbon dioxide and other wastes that the baby produces. Okay. Unfortunately, it doesn't protect the baby. So if mother is drinking or using drugs, those substances are able to diffuse and get passed on to the baby. Certain diseases too, viruses, HIV. So mom has to be careful of what she ingests and what she exposes herself to when she's pregnant. All right. And now these are a couple websites you can look at. Again, I'm not sure if this link will work, but you can try it. This should work if you click on it. And this just shows you if mother does get exposed to alcohol and other substances, at what point the embryo is most susceptible. And one thing to understand is and this is from the movie, the lungs and the brain are still developing almost till the end of development. So, and a lot of the organs have formed at this point. So she really is susceptible to alcohol and drug use early on. Not that it's safer to take drugs towards the end, but when that embryo is going through mitosis and the cells are dividing and the DNA is making copies of itself, that's when it is at most risk of um, of birth defects from certain chemicals, drugs, alcohol. Okay. Now, just to review, I wanted to show you this picture because this comes up a lot in some of the questions that are going to follow on the Castle Learning. So, when you're talking about reproduction, a lot of processes, but just to kind of keep it all in order, you have to start with meiosis. Meiosis produces sperm and egg. You can't reproduce without those two cells, okay? And remember, they have half the DNA. So picture one is actually showing you the process of fertilization. But before that, meiosis has to come first. So meiosis, then fertilization, so sperm meets egg. And now you have a cell, a single cell called a zygote. This is the fertilized egg. It has the complete chromosome number. So we're talking 46 chromosomes. And now, once it starts dividing, it no longer is called a zygote. It is called an embryo. That embryo divides by mitosis. Okay. And then this final step over here, this arrow represents, so this is when that embryo starts forming those different layers, ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm, and it starts to become different cells. This is differentiation. And then you would finally have a fetus. Okay. So these are the order of the steps and the processes involved in reproduction. Okay. So these are a couple questions that you can try to answer. Okay, so where do the egg and sperm unite? That would be the oviduct. This process is called fertilization. What is the new cell called when the egg and sperm unite? Oh, I spelled that wrong. It's called a zygote. And by what process does this one cell become multicellular? That would be mitosis. Okay, so review this, please. If you have any questions, text me on Remind and use this to help you answer the Castle Learning questions. Bye.